From year to year, month to month, week to week, and day to day, people across the world are obsessed with a phenomenon that is professional wrestling. But why? 101 reasons to love professional wrestling. There are many components of professional wrestling that should be both understood and celebrated, in no particular order. Suspension of disbelief. The willingness to suspend one's critical facilities and believe something surreal. It's a sacrifice of realism and logic in favor of enjoyment. The term was first introduced by the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge way back in 1817. The term itself is only about 200 years old, but the idea of having an audience play along goes back decades, centuries, and even millenniums. In theater and writing, it is the act of engaging the audience's willingness to overlook reality and enjoy the premise in the world it is presented in. But what about professional wrestling? What disbeliefs are we being asked to suspend? Are we supposed to believe that two grown adults are so mad at each other that they want to settle their differences in an elevated square surrounded by 3 ropes? And they do this in front of a sports arena filled with screaming spectators, with thousands or even millions at home watching on a weekly basis. All of this while wearing colorful outfits and pursuing the right to wear a gold and jewel-encrusted belt to be champion. And we're just supposed to accept that if we the fan cheer loud enough, our favorites will gain energy to overcome? Are we supposed to believe that some of these wrestlers are actually the Walking Dead? Monsters? Warriors? Beast? Barbers? Rebo men? Witch doctors? Clowns? Cowboys? Vampires? And just about any other character that could be imagined. And then we're supposed to actually believe that this is a family business. We're supposed to just accept that someone can attack their boss and not lose their job and livelihood. We're supposed to believe that giants can be defeated. We're supposed to believe that this guy is one of Hollywood's biggest stars. We're supposed to believe that boyhood dreams can come true. We're supposed to believe that tomorrow is another day. We're supposed to believe that legends live forever. If you want to be a fan of professional wrestling, then your answers to all these questions should be a resounding oh hell yes. Before attendance numbers, ticket sales, buy rates, ratings, and merch sales, suspension of disbelief is the currency that professional wrestling is measured on. If we believe, if we are engaged, if we are lost in the world that is created, then ultimately they are doing their jobs. And when they do their job properly, professional wrestling is a work of athletic art. It's the same magic that gets both an eager child and a grown adult on their feet cheering, jeering, and anticipating the reveal of the next trick. The steel chair. The steel chair is an offshoot of a folding chair, a light portable piece of seating furniture. The folding chair's roots go back to 15th century BC. Yes, that's BC. The folding chair itself was patented by John Cham in 1855, but it would be in 1947 when the great Frederick Arnold created the first ever aluminum folding chair. 10 years later, Mr. Arnold's Brooklyn, New York company was making close to 15,000 chairs a day. Meanwhile, pro wrestling shows were often held in auditoriums, convention centers, and venues that would have bleachers and chairs for spectators to sit in. So it would have only been natural for a street fight, death match, or no-holds-barred match to spill into the seats. Brawlers like the Funk Brothers, who were outstanding grapplers in their own right, took it upon themselves to take the fan seats back, since their fans were often only using the edge of them anyway. By the early 80s, all the wrestling territories were embracing the idea of bloody brawls. None of that would have been complete without a chair or two. The use of this foreign object has often been reserved for the most hated of rivals and the most desperate of situations. Yet in the 90s, professional wrestling saw a surge in steel chair violence. Wrapped in barbed wire, lit on fire, or used in tandem, the steel chair's place in professional wrestling history cannot be ignored. Everyone was swinging chairs. Everyone was taking heads off. Everyone was crushing skulls. Really, everyone. Okay, maybe one guy didn't. Oh, nope, he did too. Times have changed since these brutal attacks of interior design. Thanks to advancements in science and medicine, it is now frowned upon to swing a chair at someone's skull. Concussions are real, very real. This doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but when it does, it's met with controversy. And this also doesn't mean that steel chairs' best days are over. Not at all. The steel chair is now used more for attacks to the back and other more creative moves. But still, it's the C in TLC for a reason. When you are in need of a place to sit, you don't have a lot of room, and comfort is nowhere near the top of your priority list, then the steel chair is your friend. However, that's not always the case in professional wrestling. History. Wrestling has been around forever. Its origins are deep and has been around since ancient Greece. But we're not going to go that far back today. We're just going to go back about 200 years ago. So, hop in your DeLorean, phone booth, TARDIS, or preferred time-traveling vehicle, because it's time to bump to the future. In the 1830s, the idea of combining wrestling and entertainment began in France. It was connected to the sideshow attraction worlds of circuses, traveling carnivals, and vaudeville. The traveling wrestling shows would continue to grow and be loved as a global art form and entertainment option. At this time, George Hackenschmidt, a thriving bodybuilder, began his illustrious and trailblazing career. He would carry his share of championships, but also fame and acclaim. Frank Gotch would become his biggest foe. In 1911, the two would face off at the new Comiskey Park in Chicago and drew a very impressive 30,000 fans. However, the form of professional wrestling as we know it began in the 1920s, when the reveal of matches being predetermined became more widely known. With the likes of Frank Gotch and Hackenschmidt both retiring, there just weren't any new stars at the time. This led to Ed Lewis, Billy Sandow, and Toots Mondt joining forces to start their own promotion. This is where wrestling as we know it in modern day really took shape. The innovative trio would feature tag team wrestling, time limits, signature moves, and heel tactics like distracting the referee to add more theatrics to the existing art form. In 1948, the National Wrestling Alliance was born. The NWA was a group of independent companies that would unify their various world titles into one World Heavyweight Championship. In the 1940s and 50s, it would be Lou Thesz to lead the company. Also in the 1950s, thanks to the invention of television, professional wrestling saw a resurgence in popularity. NWA would dominate for many years, but in 1960, Verne Gagne broke away from the alliance. He would rename his company the American Wrestling Association. Vince McMahon Sr. pulled his Capital Wrestling Corporation from the NWA in 1963. And you could say at that point the territory wars were in full effect. The 70s were best summed up with three things: Bruno Sammartino, Andre the Giant, and Georgia Championship Wrestling. Bruno Sammartino would own the 60s while he held the WWF Heavyweight Championship for 7 years, 8 months, and 1 day. That's 2,803 days. He would win it back in 73, but in a huge disappointment, he would only hold it this time for 3 years, 4 months, and 20 days. To say Bruno Sammartino was a star would be an understatement. Meanwhile, another Hall of Famer was just getting started. Andre the Giant joined the WWF in 1973. He would make the rounds through all the territories as the legend of the Giant truly began. Then in 1979, Georgia Championship Wrestling would become the first nationally broadcast wrestling show on Ted Turner's TBS network. Wrestling on cable? Who would have thought? But this is the same professional wrestling that was evolved through the carnival circuit. The carny tactics of trying to get over on someone was clearly at play. The politics between rival owners over using wrestlers over money and market dominance was very competitive at the time. Enter Vince McMahon Jr. He would take over the WWF, buy national time slots, buy up territories, and become the leading brand in professional wrestling. The NWA saw struggles at the time and would become centered around Jim Crockett Promotions. It would finally land on TV in the mid-80s, but but it was a bit too late to catch up to the momentum that Vince McMahon Jr.'s WWF had created. A lot of that momentum is thanks to Hulk Hogan and WrestleMania. Hulk Hogan became an icon, while WrestleMania became a pastime. The Rock and Wrestling connection was a huge success, to say the least. For many, the 80s was a great period in wrestling because of WWF's magic. WWF had the immortal Hulk Hogan, the eighth wonder of the world Andre the Giant, Macho Man Randy Savage, and the Ultimate Warrior, all in singles competition, while their tag team division was stacked with the likes of the Hart Foundation, the British Bulldogs, and Demolition. Meanwhile, NWA had Nature Boy Ric Flair, the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, and Harley Race, with a tag division stacked with the likes of Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, the Four Horsemen duos, and of course the legendary Road Warriors. In the late 80s, Jim Crockett would tap out and sell his NWA territory, which at the time was the main one, to the TBS owner, Atlanta Braves owner, CNN owner, and Jane Fonda's husband, billionaire Ted himself, Ted Turner. In his first few years of ownership, he would go on to rename the promotion to World Championship Wrestling, WCW. In 1993, WCW would break away from NWA completely and start doing its own thing. And by doing its own thing, I mean hire all of WWF's biggest stars from the 80s. The WWF would still hold their own as number one, but not by much. While the legendary likes of The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, and Bret Hart were having some of the best feuds and rivalries of all time, the early to mid-90s were still a bit rough. WCW couldn't do much with WWF's former stars, but had established a strong undercard, and their homegrown main eventers were remarkable in the likes of Sting, Ric Flair, and The Giant, which is not Andre, but in fact the future WWE star The Big Show, who was at the time being cast as Andre's alleged son. Recreating WWF's 80s and the 90s just didn't work. But WCW did not give up. It would be just a few years later, and the next wave of WWF superstars to fall prey to Ted Turner's deep pocketbooks that changed the wave of things. WWF's Diesel, Razor Ramon, 123 Kid, and a few others would jump ship to WCW. This was all during the Monday Night Wars. WWF's Monday Night Raw and WCW's Monday Nitro were going head-to-head for ratings. When Razor and Diesel both showed up on Nitro, it created a gigantic, enormous, huge shift in the ratings. Then for 83 weeks, WCW would go on to dominate the ratings thanks to the New World Order. The NWO became a pop culture hit thanks to the bad guy version of Hulk Hogan, Hollywood Hogan, Razor Ramon, who went by his real name of Scott Hall, and Kevin Nash, who was Diesel in WWF. WWF struck lightning with the rise of Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Mick Foley's Mankind, and everything just clicking at the same time. The wrestlers were pop culture icons, classic moments were created, and a lot of money was made. Then digging deeper, on the East Coast was Extreme Championship Wrestling. At this time, ECW was the third most successful company in the States. Owned by Paul Heyman, Extreme Championship Wrestling was a little engine that could. Well, the little engine that could swing a chair, dive from a balcony, incite a riot, and show things you would not see anywhere else. ECW's hardcore style and a lot of what they did would quickly inspire WWF and WCW's products. And a good amount of ECW's top stars would leave for these companies' bigger checkbook and much more exposure. In 2001, things really changed when WWF bought both competitors, WCW and ECW, becoming the juggernaut they are today. In 2002, the World Wildlife Fund sued the World Wrestling Federation over the use of the initials WWF, and they actually won. With that, they got the F out and rebranded as the WWE. The WWE would become a publicly traded company, go on to produce movies, and broke huge ground with their subscription service, the WWE Network. The 2000s also would see the rise of John Cena and Brock Lesnar as two true WWE icons, but the likes of Triple H, Edge, Batista, Kurt Angle, and Randy Orton also contributed to many historical moments and matches. The 2010s have been dominated by the likes of Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, and Roman Reigns, while the WWE has seen its company grow to the likes never imagined. With no competition on a huge level, the WWE has been able to dominate the marketplace. Companies like Ring of Honor, TNA, Impact, or whatever they want to be called, have also put in the effort to compete. While these companies have had some outstanding talents, moments, and success in their own right, the WWE has reigned supreme. In 2019, the group of Cody Rhodes, the son of Dusty Rhodes, the Young Bucks, and Kenny Omega joined forces with Tony Khan, the son of a billionaire businessman, to launch All Elite Wrestling. AEW will look to compete with WWE as they bring pro wrestling back to Ted Turner's TNT network. As we head into a new decade, it is apparent that history repeats itself, even in professional wrestling. This is just a tiny taste of the history of professional wrestling in America. Japan, Mexico, the UK, and other parts of the world have their own stories as well. Folks on ESPN and in sports bars think it's impressive that they know the batting average of some third baseman from 4 years ago. It's all sports. It's baseball, basketball, hockey, football. Everyone knows stats, history, and legacies. But do you know what's even more impressive? Knowing the name of all 4 members of the old biker gang stable, DOA. That's impressive. Knowing how many intercontinental title reigns Razor Ramon had is impressive. There have been many shows over many years with many memories, facts, stories, results, and moments that a true wrestling fan will always remember. You don't get much better than the history of professional wrestling. Last minute kickouts. Even before a child enters school, they know how to count to 3, which comes in very handy when you're a fan of professional wrestling. The object to a professional wrestling match is to win. After wearing an opponent down, the wrestler will attempt to achieve victory. The most traditional and common way is the pinfall. A pinfall is when a wrestler has the other wrestler's shoulders pinned to the mat for a 3 count. The referee will get down and physically count by slapping their hand on the mat. 1, 2. But what if the wrestler kicks out? A kick-out is when a wrestler lifts one or both of their pinned shoulders at the very moment the referee's authoritative hand is about to reach that oh so victorious 3 count. The key word is about to. The silence of the anticipating crowd is interrupted by the spectacle of survival. This is followed up by the collected eruption of awe. The crowd will cheer if it's their favorite who kicked out. The crowd will boo if it's the villain. Then there are times the athletic game of chess the 2 wrestlers are playing is so enthralling that they will be in amazement of the mere feat in front of them. When the wrestler hits the big move and you just know it's over, the art of the last minute kick out is enough to make the healthiest of hearts skip a beat. When 2 wrestlers enter a ring, anyone can have the hope of winning. But that hope only becomes a reality when the referee counts 1, 2. The Lingo. The world of professional wrestling is unique to say the least, and has been around a long time. With any long-running entity, there are certain traditions and customs that are part of the story. In professional wrestling, this includes an entire language. Carney, or Kizarni, is the traditional language used between wrestlers that want to keep their conversations private from the fans. It's called Carney because that's where it comes from, the traveling carnival circuit of old. It's like a cross between Pig Latin and Snoop's Izzle Talk. It sounds silly as hell, and it is. But once you know it, you kizant shizake is it. On top of this wacky language, the world of wrestling has a plethora of terms that would make a non-fan raise more than the people's eyebrow. Let's take a look at some of the basics. Babyface. A babyface, or simply a face, is a good guy, the hero of the story. The goal of a face is to get the crowd on their side and yearn for their success. You could say, the babyface comeback delighted the crowd. Heel. The heel is a villain, the bad guy. They will cheat, antagonize the crowd, and their success is measured in boos. An example of this would be, the heel made the children cry as she cheated their hero out of victory. Booker. A booker, or a writer in some cases, is the creative mind behind the fun. They plot out the storylines, matches, and the moments. You'll likely hear a wrestling fan say, "The booking on this show has gone downhill." Over. When a wrestler has achieved their goal of connecting with the crowd as a face or heel, this is when a wrestler is over. A good example of this would be the new wrestler's improvements have gotten him over with the crowd. Job. To job is to lose a match. An extension of this is a jobber, which is someone who always loses matches in order to help put over other talents. They're also called enhancement talent. You would hear a wrestling fan say, "The small wrestler had the job to the big wrestler to help put him over before his big match." Bump. To fall down. This is often in reaction to another wrestler giving the other a move or an attempt to hurt one's opponent. Along with grappling holds and strikes, these are the crashing falls that wears the wrestlers down. An example of this would be the fall from the cage was a horrible bump. Selling. Selling is the art of acting out the pain of a move, the surprise of a storyline twist, or a written plot point. It is the performance that convinces the audience that the predetermined action is believable. An example you would hear of this would be the wrestler continues to sell his leg injury by limping past the crowd. Promo. A promo is an in-character speech, interview, or monologue that is used to garner the wrestler, a storyline, or a match, or attention, anticipation, or suspense. For example, the promo that wrestler just cut got the crowd excited for the match. Work. A work is when something is choreographed or scripted. It's when the performer is on script and is participating in the agreed upon illusion. An example would be, "That's not a real injury, that's a work." Shoot. A shoot is when something is real or unscripted. This can be done verbally in a shoot promo where the performer breaks the fourth wall and exposes the business, or someone can physically shoot, which is, as you can correctly assume, is when a wrestler attempts to legitimately hurt their opponent. For an example of shoot, you would hear someone say, "From the looks of her bloody nose, you would think they were shooting." Blading. The blood you see in a professional wrestling match is not always from a violent collision, but it does happen. It's often uncontrolled and is taken very serious by medical staff. However, a professional wrestler, more so in the past, would go that extra extreme step in order to thrill a crowd. No, that's not ketchup. Blading, or gigging, is the act of cutting one's own body, often the crown of the forehead, to achieve the gruesome effect of blood. For example, the veteran wrestler's forehead is covered in scars from years of blading. Mark. A mark is a fan of professional wrestling. It is often used as an insult, but anyone who is a fan of professional wrestling can be considered a mark. There are also smarks, or smart marks, who follow the backstage politics and consider themselves educated on the business. With the access of information that is the internet, the lines of mark and smart have been blurred. Ultimately, fans are marks and marks are fans. An example of this would be, the mark held up their sign high in an attempt to anger the bad guy. And finally, kayfabe. Kayfabe is the all-encompassing term that maintains the suspension of disbelief. It is sticking to the script, staying in character, and playing along. For an example of kayfabe, you would hear someone say, the rival wrestlers stopped conversing when they spotted a mark nearby to avoid breaking kayfabe. The lingo of professional wrestling goes on and on. All of this is insider talk, but pretty much anyone who follows wrestling can tell you a good chunk of the lingo. It's kinda cool that as professional wrestling fans, we have our own language. David vs. Goliath. The lore of a smaller man taking on the impossible challenge of facing off with a giant has been around since the beginning of time. The term itself goes back to the biblical story of David, a normal man, defeating a 9-foot giant soldier, the Goliath, by slinging stones at him and then cutting off his head. While no one in professional wrestling is cutting heads off, thankfully, there are many stories and examples of the underdog rising to that oh so impossible challenge. Logic will tell us that there is minimal hope for a man who is dwarfed by feet, not inches, and hundreds of pounds. The behemoths of old would rarely even bump for anyone, that alone, a smaller man. And why would they? They were massive in comparison to their opponents. Common sense doesn't mean that we, the wrestling fans, are forced to automatically cheer for the bigger guy. This is professional wrestling. We have our own rules and reality. With a little creativity, everyone has a chance. The Davids of professional wrestling might not always slay the beast, but sometimes leave them worn, with a newfound respect for the smaller man. But sometimes miracles can happen. Sometimes the Goliath isn't taken down by a well-swung stone to the forehead. Sometimes the Goliath doesn't get their head cut off. Sometimes the Goliath isn't defeated by prayer, but rather by chair. Sometimes it's a big move. Sometimes it's utilizing one's quickness to sneak in the pin. Glorified giant killers like Lucha legend Rey Mysterio, Hall of Famer 1-2-3 Kid Sean Waltman, ECW icon Spike Dudley, and the Enigma Jeff Hardy all prove that not only can a smaller wrestler hang with the monsters, but sometimes actually win. In professional wrestling, big things can come in small packages. Shirts. The t-shirt as we know it first appeared during the Spanish-American War, when the US Navy issued them to soldiers as underwear. Over time, the t-shirt would become acceptable as casual outerwear. Printed t-shirts would debut in the 1940s, but it wouldn't be until the 1960s when the printed t-shirt would become a cultural norm. With their finger on the pulse of pop culture, professional wrestlers would inevitably adopt the new form of self-expression. The 60s and 70s saw some very memorable uses of the printed text t-shirt. Whether it was one of Ox Baker's bluntly heel, "You Will Hate Me" shirts, you were seeing t-shirts start to pop up in professional wrestling. Or you would see the likes of Dusty Sucks Eggs, the t-shirt that Terry Funk wore to antagonize the son of a plumber. And in case you didn't know his father's occupation, Dusty confirmed this with a shirt of his own. Then in the late 70s, Greg Valentine was so proud of his destruction of the late great Chief Wahoo McDaniel that he sported a "I Broke Wahoo's Leg" shirt to garner negative attention from the crowd. With the rise of the WWF in the 80s, everyone started to get shirts to both wear as part of their identity, but also to sell to fans as souvenirs and a chance to represent their favorite superstars. The wrestling business and the world would quickly learn that wrestling fans don't wear their hearts on their sleeves. They wear their hearts on the whole damn shirt. During the 80s, we saw shirts like Hulk Hogan's iconic yellow and red Hulkamania shirt, Rowdy Piper's Hot Rod Ringer shirt, and Randy Savage's awesome Macho Man shirt. The 90s would see two other massively successful shirts in Stone Cold Steve Austin's Austin 316 and the New World Order logo shirts. Still, everyone with value got shirts made, or even multiple shirts, and the fans of wrestling bought them all. The WWF and WCW weren't the only ones cranking out successful shirts. It wouldn't be too surprising to see Cactus Jack's Wanted Dead shirt or any of the ECW shirts in the 90s or early 2000s. The 2000s can be summed up with two shirts: CM Punk's very successful white shirt with lightning bolts, and the Bullet Club shirt. This shirt was brought into Hot Topics by consumer demand thanks to the soaring popularity of the New Japan Pro Wrestling stable. In recent years, the t-shirt market has not slowed down. The WWE cranks out new shirts almost weekly. Meanwhile, as fashion often dictates, what was once old is now retro. And thanks to technology and very smart business, there are even options for the independent performers to sell their shirts through the very accessible pro wrestling tees. Everyone has a shirt. Everyone. They say the kindness of people will give you the shirt off their back. However, if it's an Austin 316 shirt, professional wrestling fan, might not be so kind. Drama. Everyone has a story. One they've experienced themselves, one they've been told by others, or one they've made up completely out of thin air. To deliver that narrative, a decision is made on what style and tone to deliver it in. The use of drama to captivate an audience is a timeless tradition. It's a serious tone of storytelling that utilizes a wide range of emotions and unexpected circumstances. The brawler's ballet that is professional wrestling is not without a colossal amount of drama. Based on Aristotle's 6 elements of drama, professional wrestling passes all the requirements with flying colors, and probably a few flying elbow drops. First and foremost is the plot. The plot is considered the most important of Aristotle's artistic criteria. For a dramatic story to have a lasting effect, it needs to have a great plot, or a collection of moments that present the arc of the story. To say wrestling hasn't had its share of iconic storylines would be an understatement. When a plot is well written and well performed, the viewer is rewarded with an escape from reality that can sometimes have more of an impact on them than their actual daily lives. The second of the 6 is spectacle. Professional wrestling is spectacle. It's the oohs and the ahs. It's the roller coaster of emotion. The biggest of dramas end in the biggest of matches. 2 competitors finally going face to face to settle their issues in a ring in front of invested spectators. If this isn't a spectacle, I don't know what is. Third is character. This is not only the gimmick, but the moral compass of the performers. It is who the players of the story essentially are. We have humble heroes, evil villains, those born with a silver spoon in their mouth, those from the wrong side of the tracks, and there's everything in between, all for the audience to relate with, associate with, and even despise. The next is diction. Diction is the speech style. It's the chosen tone and style to deliver the message. It can be common speech or something poetic. No matter the delivery, if the audience is being captivated, the performer's job is being done. Fifth is thought. This is the philosophy behind the lesson being told. It's the acknowledgement of roles and the acknowledgement of the presented reality. It's good defeating evil. It's insecurity of the heart. It's jealousy. It's what ignites the passion of the character and gives the audience the decision of what side to choose. And finally, melody. Melody is the background score to the story. It's the rhythm and pacing. It's the punctuating of the right points and unleashing the perfect tempo of tempers. In both storyline and in actual matches themselves, this is the give and pull between the performers and the audience that brings emotion to a boiling point. It's an artistic understanding of manipulating the crowd's collective energy. The pulse of professional wrestling is etched in the blood, sweat, and tears of created drama. Aristotle was a visionary, a scientist, and the father of Western philosophy. But even he wouldn't have imagined the drama created by professional wrestling. Pro athlete crossovers. The history of pro athletes crossing over to professional wrestling goes back to the 1910s, when Jack Johnson, a renowned boxer, entered the world of wrestling. Since then, professional wrestling has had a storied past with professional athletes crossing over to the beloved squared circle. Everyone with a little muscle and success in athletics thinks they could be destined for the same success, but it's not always a sure shot. There are essentially 3 kinds of pro athlete crossovers. The first of the 3 are those who show up for a big one-off match. They will show up and promote the big event and do their best not to embarrass themselves while still being entertaining. The great Muhammad Ali would battle Antonio Inoki and even referee the main event of WrestleMania 1. At WrestleMania 2, members of the Chicago Bears NFL team would take part in a huge 20-man battle royal. Andre the Giant would win this battle royal, but the football player's presence was definitely felt. Of course, who could forget the appearances by legendary commentator Bob Uecker and Pete Rose? One of the best examples of a crossover athlete having a big match would be LT Lawrence Taylor taking on Bam Bam Bigelow in the main event of WrestleMania 11. In 1997, NBA champion Dennis Rodman joined the New World Order during the peak of NWO's success. Of course, we have to mention Floyd Money Mayweather, championship boxer, took on the Big Show at WrestleMania 24. Some of these moments are classics that fans will never forget, but some of these moments are what wrestling fans' nightmares are made of. The second type of professional athlete crossovers are those who want to capitalize on their sports fame. These performers come in, train, and honestly put in the effort to succeed. But sadly, this category is for those who are unsuccessful in their attempt to cross over. NFL Hall of Famer Kevin Green joined WCW and could have potentially done more, but had to exit the world of wrestling once the NFL insisted on no wrestling clauses in contracts. This trend would continue in 2007 when Adam Pac-Man Jones showed up in TNA, but due to his NFL contract dictating he can have no physical contact, his appearance was pointless. Still, this didn't stop TNA from giving him the tag titles alongside Ron R-Truth Killings. In 2013, Quentin Rampage Jackson joined the TNA roster to surprisingly less than stellar reviews. He would quickly ditch wrestling and go back to fighting. There have been many pro athlete crossovers that we are best just to forget. The final type of pro athlete crossovers are those who truly excel. These athletes enter the world of professional wrestling and they just get it. They blend right into the beautiful sonata that is professional wrestling. They connected with the crowd, they won championships, and they have created Hall of Fame legacies. We're talking about household names like Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle, those who had success in amateur wrestling but would find their careers take off in the squared circle. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Ron Simmons, Goldberg, Titus O'Neil, and a slew of others came from the world of football. Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, Matt Riddle, and of course Ronda Rousey came from the UFC and have all had their own success. Before Mark Henry was inducting his opponents into the Hall of Pain, he was an Olympic weightlifter. The list of successful pro athlete crossovers in wrestling goes on and continues to grow in 2019. A pro athlete may be able to score the winning touchdown, thrill the crowd with a slam dunk, or get the epic knockout with one punch. Nevertheless, the world of professional wrestling requires a unique breed of athlete to effectively cross over. Championship belts. Small-minded people will mock professional wrestling by minimizing the art form, the two grown adults in their underwear fighting over a belt. Ha ha, said no one. Professional wrestling fans know a championship belt is a symbol of greatness. The first championship belt was awarded to bare-knuckle boxer Tom Cribb in 1810 by King George III after a victory over a former slave. So, there's that. The roots of the championship belt in professional wrestling, however, dates back to 1905 when George Hackenschmidt became recognized as the world champion after winning tournaments in various countries. In professional wrestling, the wrestlers fight back and forth, clawing and climbing up the rankings, and giving it their all and then some, just so they can be handed over the title after an epic win. The belt is king, it's priority, it's what everybody wants to achieve. But the belt itself? Well, the craftsmanship, the feeling of holding it, the cool look of a cool belt is undeniable. The evolution of this amazingly well-crafted piece of combative art has been truly breathtaking. Along with the classic world champion, wrestling has had many other titles, including the tag team titles, titles for specific weight divisions, and other secondary mid-card belts. These belts would be designed with the obvious intention to explain what they are. Some would even prefer these belts over the designs of the respected world title straps. The championship belt would change with the times, from smaller to bigger, from dull to shiny, and from basic to very detailed. The most renowned of all iconic championship belts is the Big Gold Belt. This magnificently constructed belt was crafted by silversmith Charles Crumrin. It saw its legacy go back to the Jim Crockett era of NWA. It would be part of WWF folklore when Nature Boy Ric Flair showed up with it in '91. For many years, WCW would use this belt as its top prize. It would even be used by the WWE during a few of the many brand split eras. From 1976 to 1986, the NWA used the original 10 pounds of gold. This piece has a very precise design that features a domed earth centerpiece with beautifully constructed flags of different nations. With the resurgence of the National Wrestling Alliance, the 10 pounds of gold title belt has returned to the spotlight once again. In 1988, at WrestleMania 3, the WWF introduced their Winged Eagle design. This awe-inspiring design was part of many fans' childhoods, as the likes of Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, Bret the Hitman Hart, The Undertaker, the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels, and Stone Cold Steve Austin would all go on to hold this title before the company would move on during the peak of the Attitude Era. In recent years, the WWE has removed a lot of the personality of these championships in favor of a more universal design style, and it might as well just be tattooed around the waist of Brock Lesnar. Meanwhile, there are other stunning straps, tremendous titles, and beautiful belts that are being earned, yearned for, and heralded in their own respect. Yes, at the end of the day, a championship belt could be considered a prop. But like Freddy's glove, Ralphie's BB gun, and Dorothy's ruby red slippers, it can mean a whole lot. And let's face it, the championship belt is easily the coolest championship in all of sports. The championship belt is history. It's a symbol of success. It's the epitome of achievement. And that's something any fan of professional wrestling would gladly defend.